for us to have a nonpartisan conversation about solving needs in our country. I wish we would do this more often around every committee in the Senate, frankly, and in Congress. For those of you perhaps not aware, I spent 13 years, 6 months, 7 days, and 12 hours on local county council. And so,
But who's counting?
exactly, I was not excited to leave at all. I really enjoyed my time there, but I'll say without question that the issue of housing is very much a local issue. And frankly, while the state legislature can do some good, it's those communities who really have building caps that distorts the market in extraordinary ways. The way that they use their zoning laws and density requirements is in fact what has exacerbated the problem from California to New York and beyond. How does that happen? Well, your local communities decides they don't want anybody else moving in. It's like not everyone wants a wall built, but we're building this virtual wall outside of certain communities by saying we're not going to allow for any high density construction in these areas. And you add that on top of the construction cost and 7% interest rates, you have destroyed the local housing market. Mayor, you've done a fabulous job in Texas, from crime to improving safety to focusing on homelessness and reducing the amount of time it takes to get things done on every topic, it seems like, frankly. And I really appreciate your service to your community in many ways, to Texas and beyond. Can you talk about how you would address the issue from a zoning perspective, number one? Number two, compound question here, is the homelessness crisis is something we should all be passionate about. An 18% increase with record dollars being spent through HUD to address homelessness, and yet the problem gets worse. It's almost as if the more money we put out there, the worse the problem has gotten. I'm sure someone will rebuke me for that statement, but the truth of the matter is we seem to be dealing with something more complicated than here's a couple more dollars, let's solve the problem.
Well, I appreciate the question, and I'll do my best to tell you, in all cases, my perspective as the leader of a city on the policy side and the political side, as opposed to the bureaucratic side. But we're talking about something that's largely a bureaucratic issue, and so there's just a lot of the issues related to, specifically asked about zoning. I would also throw in with that permitting. This is process. This is about process, and this is about, in many cases, local governments not being sufficiently focused or perhaps incentivized to focus on their process and making it easier to do business with the city. Frankly, there are entities that exist in the world, in the United States in particular, that know how to build houses, know where houses need to be built, and can do so profitably, but are being hamstrung by local governments and how difficult it can be to navigate their process and how long it can take to bring a project to fruition. So we've had success, but it's not for no reason. I've had to really lean in over the past 6 years with the bureaucracy. Our bureaucracy is headed by a city manager in Dallas, but I've had to really impart upon them just how important it is that we prioritize getting down these permit wait times. This didn't just happen on its own. Departments had to be consolidated, staff had to be moved around, things had to be done. You had to reconfigure, how we went about serving the developer community, having meetings with folks about their projects, and just we had to be very creative about how we got projects done more quickly. And so that takes a concerted effort, and that's a process thing. I'm talking to the United States Senate right now, and so the question I think I want to not address here is, what can you do to help with that? I mean, I think we need some form of change in conversation around this topic of housing, because I think we get confused, frankly, and think that housing somehow is something that we, as the local level, can just determine the price of, and that there's nothing that housing is like everything else. Supply and demand determines the price of it, but we don't act that way. And I think we could use some help with changing that narrative around that. As far as homelessness is concerned, I would say similarly, we have a narrative problem. In a lot of ways, I've had to push back on the idea that the folks that you see sleeping on our streets are there because of the high median housing price in Dallas. And it's really not about that. The unhoused that you see on our streets are there for other reasons that I outlined before. So I think in addition to thinking about carrots and sticks and the things that Congress can do financially, we could use some help with changing the narrative around these topics to understand what the real root causes are.
Extending myself to 54 seconds you did not use in your opening statement. I'm going to continue
you.
for a question with Dr. Glazer. To me, the housing issue we have of affordability is, in fact, the more you suppress housing construction because of your zoning laws, the higher your prices are going to go in the communities. You're talking about a manufactured crisis. Please continue. For my
Well, I agree with that pretty strongly, Senator. So thank you for taking this up. I think this is exactly right. I mean, America is full of land, right? We are an abundantly rich country. This is not necessary. We did this to ourselves. We did this to ourselves by stopping the natural genius of American builders, by restraining them over and over again, by making it impossible to figure out new ways to build. Just look at what's happened to productivity in the construction industry. Every other industry, right, it soars. Construction has stagnated. It has stagnated in part because our projects are tiny, which means that our firms are tiny, and firms that have 4 people, 6 people don't have research and development departments. There was a time when construction was just as dynamic as every other industry, but because of this web of local land use regulations, it is no longer so.
Thank you, sir. Senator Kim.